Rain taps a window somewhere in southern England, summer 1940. A lamp throws a hard circle of light across a commander's desk. Paperwork, requisitions, grim lists of what's missing, rifles, machine guns, ammunition, whole categories marked in red. Across the blotter sits a strange new answer, a metal tube with a side-mounted magazine, rough welds, bare steel, a stock that looks borrowed from a workshop bin. Some men laugh the first time they see it. Some flinch when they hear it run. Because this ugly little British gun, the Sten, was never meant to win beauty contests. It was meant to fire when hands were shaking, when training was rushed, when the next corner might be the last. Stay with this story and you'll see how a weapon mocked for its looks became a tool of survival, how it worked, why it shocked people, and what happened next. But Britain's problem wasn't style, it was time. After the evacuation from Dunkirk, enormous amounts of heavy equipment had been left behind in France. Vehicles, artillery, stores at the very moment the country braced for invasion and prepared to rebuild an army. Factories were already stretched. Imports were uncertain. A modern submachine gun like the American Thompson existed, but it was expensive, and you couldn't conjure millions of complex parts overnight. So the requirement became brutally simple. Give soldiers a close-range automatic weapon they could learn quickly, maintain with minimal fuss, and produce in staggering numbers. Not for parades. For boarding actions, street fighting, raids, sentry removal, trench linings, factory guards, airfield defenses, any place where a rifle's length and a bolt-action rhythm could get a man killed. So the Sten was the industrial equivalent of a field dressing, plain, fast, life-saving. Designed at RSAF Enfield by Major Reginald Shepard and Harold Turpin, its very name stitched together that urgency. S and T with EN for Enfield. A weapon built out of necessity, not pride. Under the skin, the engineering was almost blunt in its honesty. A simple blowback action, an open bolt. Pull the trigger, the bolt surges forward under spring pressure, strips a 9x19 millimeter cartridge from the magazine, chambers it, fires it, then the recoil throws the bolt back again. No locked breech, no complicated boot timing system, fewer precision surfaces that demand jeweler-level machining. Think of it like a sturdy door with a heavy spring. You don't need a fancy lock if the door is thick enough and the spring is tuned right. The Sten's door was its bolt mass. Its spring was the recoil spring. Crude? Some called it that. But the simplicity carried a battlefield gift. Fewer parts to break, fewer adjustments to teach, fewer mysteries for a frightened 19-year-old to solve under fire. Stamped and welded components replaced elaborate milling. A tube receiver could be made quickly. Barrels and bolts still mattered, of course, but the overall system reduced manufacturing pain. That meant more guns in more hands, faster. And that's where saved lives stops being poetic and becomes mechanical. A weapon that doesn't arrive can't protect anyone. A weapon too complicated to maintain becomes a liability. A weapon that takes months of specialized training creates gaps in units that need to move tomorrow. The Sten arrived with scars of that speed. Early versions had real flaws, some dangerous, some merely irritating. An open bolt gun can be prone to accidental discharge if dropped while cocked, especially if the sear engagement wears. The Sten's magazine design, based on a double-column, single-feed layout, could be fussy if the magazine was damaged or handled poorly. Dirt, bent feed lips, rough loading habits, these things could turn any automatic weapon into a jam machine. So development became a running argument between what engineers wanted and what war allowed. Trials, redesigns, procurement pressure, safety improvements, new marks. Mark II, Mark III, Mark V. Each shifting the balance between cost, durability, ergonomics, and reliability. Wooden furniture appeared on later variants for better handling. A proper pistol grip and improved sights on the Mark V made it feel less like a pipe and more like a soldier's tool. Yet even with imperfections, the core truth held. The Sten could be built quickly, taught quickly, and kept running with minimal support. In wartime Britain, that combination wasn't merely convenient, it was strategic. Picture a training yard in 1941, recruits fresh off trains, home guard volunteers with day jobs, airfield troops who might never see the frontline trench but could face a night raid. They need a weapon that makes sense in minutes, not weeks. A rifle teaches marksmanship. A submachine gun teaches survival at 10 to 50 yards, where reactions beat theory. The Sten's controls were straightforward. Its recoil was manageable in short bursts. A corporal could explain the essentials without turning it into a lecture. That meant more people became dangerous sooner. Dangerous enough to stop a rush, to clear a room, to hold a stairwell, to break contact. Now follow it into the places where looks stopped mattering. A moonless night on the French coast, 1942. Raids and reconnaissance operations had been probing occupied Europe, learning painful lessons about defenses, wire, machine gun nests, and the chaos of close-range fighting. In that chaos, a compact automatic weapon is a different kind of confidence, not bravado. Confidence, the sense that when a target appears suddenly, you can answer immediately. Later, as airborne forces prepared for the invasion of Northwest Europe, compactness became more than comfort. It became logistics. Paratroopers drop with limited weight, limited space, and seconds to assemble themselves under fire. A Sten fits where a rifle fights you, in the tight geometry of hedgerows, doorways, staircases, shattered buildings. Short weapons live longer. Fast forward to Normandy, June 1944, and the hours after the landings. Villages become puzzles of stone walls and blind corners. Patrols move through orchards and lanes where every hedgerow can hide a gun muzzle. A submachine gun doesn't replace a rifle's reach, but in the suddenness of a 10-yard encounter, it can decide who gets the first meaningful shot. Reliability here isn't a marketing term. It's whether the weapon runs when your fingers are numb and your hearing is half gone. Another scene. The Netherlands, September 1944, Operation Market Garden. Airborne troops hold narrow bridges, streets, and rooms that funnel attackers into close quarters. Fire discipline matters. Ammunition disappears quickly. The Sten's role becomes brutally specific. Short bursts, quick transitions, fast handling in confined spaces. No one admires welds in a stairwell. They admire function. And then there's the other war. Quiet, clandestine, fought in attics and forests. The Sten became a gift to resistance groups across occupied Europe because it could be produced in huge numbers and distributed widely. It was simple enough to be understood by people who weren't professional soldiers, and it used a common pistol cartridge. For underground fighters, ease of training and maintenance was not a nice to have. It was survival under constant pressure. Special operations demanded even stranger variations. Suppressed Sten models, such as the Mk2S and later suppressed variants, were requested for clandestine work. These weren't Hollywood silent. Open bolt mechanisms still had their own mechanical sound, and suppressors could overheat, demanding controlled firing. But the concept mattered. A lightweight, compact weapon adapted for missions where noise could collapse an entire network. One raid in the far reaches of the war underscores the Sten's reach. Operation WWII in 1943, when Allied commandos struck Japanese shipping in Singapore Harbor using small craft and stealth. Weapons in such operations are chosen for practicality, carry, concealment, readiness, because every extra pound is a threat to the plan. Even the Sten's faults shaped behavior in ways that, ironically, saved lives. Troops learned magazine care as a ritual. Keep it clean. Don't treat it like a handle. Inspect feed lips. Keep the mechanism free of grit. In deserts, oil can attract dust. A weapon that can function with minimal lubrication becomes useful when sand gets into everything you own. Soldiers adapt. Weapons teach habits. Those habits can keep guns running when they're needed most. And the Sten's psychological footprint was real, even if unglamorous. Nicknames varied. Some mockery stuck, because soldiers mock what scares them and what annoys them, and what looks too simple to trust. Yet many came to respect it the way you respect a tool that never asks for attention. It doesn't need to be loved. It needs to work. If you're enjoying the way this story separates myth from mechanics, consider subscribing, because the next chapters get even more surprising, and the war is full of unpretty decisions that saved very real people. Comparison makes the Sten's logic sharper. Germany fielded excellent submachine guns, MP-38 and MP-40, well regarded, practical, and mass-produced by their standards. Yet the United States had the Thompson early in the war, powerful, iconic, but costly and heavy. The Soviet PPSH-41 was a study in mass production and volume of fire, drums, stamped parts, and brutal practicality. Britain's niche was different. After the shock of 1940, Britain needed a weapon that could appear everywhere, in regular infantry sections, in armored crews, with engineers, with paratroops, with raiding parties, with airfield guards, with men who might be fighting tomorrow with training that started last week. That meant manufacturing mattered as much as doctrine, cheap enough to build in huge numbers, simple enough to teach quickly, functional enough to keep. And then comes the uncomfortable part, controversy. Some Stens did discharge if dropped while cocked. That's a real danger with open bolt designs if safety measures or sear engagement weren't sufficient. Accidents in training and handling were not just statistics. They were lives altered by a moment's carelessness or a design compromise. Wartime engineering always carries that shadow. How much risk is acceptable when the alternative is having no weapon at all? History also refuses to romanticize everything. The Sten appears in the story of Operation Anthropoid in 1942, the assassination of Reinhard Heydrich in Prague. A Sten brought to that moment jammed, an example of how any weapon can fail, and how clandestine operations often balanced on thin margins. That failure didn't erase the Sten's overall value, but it carved a permanent warning into its reputation. Simplicity helps, but nothing is magic. Still. So the broader legacy is difficult to ignore. Millions were produced in multiple variants. They served beyond World War II, in Korea, and in various post-war conflicts and insurgencies, because a simple, reliable concept tends to persist. The Sten's influence lives in the idea that a nation under pressure can design for function first. Minimal parts, minimal cost, quick training, adequate performance. Its descendants aren't always direct copies, but the philosophy echoes. Build what can be made fast. Design for the hands that will use it under stress. Accept that elegance is a luxury. Prioritize readiness. Now, return to that desk in 1940. The rain is still there. The lists are still there. The fear of invasion is still there. Somewhere outside that office, men are drilling in fields, guarding bridges, learning to fire in short bursts, learning to keep magazines clean, learning how to move through tight spaces where seconds decide everything. On paper, the Sten looks like an embarrassment. In a photograph, it looks unfinished. But in the lived reality of war, mud, sand, cold fingers, rushed training, close quarters, appearance becomes irrelevant. What matters is that when the trigger is pressed, the gun answers. When it's time to hand a weapon to someone new, the lesson fits inside a breath. When supply lines strain, factories still deliver. When fear is thick, simplicity becomes a kind of mercy. That's how this ugly British gun saved lives, not through glamour, but through fewer failures, faster readiness, and the quiet reliability that keeps people standing when they might otherwise fall. If you could redesign one thing about the Sten, sights, safety, magazine, stock, what would you change and why?